Hi, well, I'm really excited to tell you today that I'm here with Art Carter. I think he goes without saying who he is. He's the president and CEO of California Regional MLS, the largest MLS in the country. And I saw a really exciting announcement just a couple of weeks ago about Art partnering, not Art, the organization, partnering with Local Logic to integrate a lot more local information. And so I would love to learn more about that. I've recently done some market research with consumers, and they're just as excited for their realtors to have that depth of information as I'm sure the realtors themselves are. So welcome, Art. So great to see you today.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just start out with, before we even get into the details, why do you believe local information is helpful to realtors and to their clients and potential clients?
And it kind of rolls into what you were talking about, the consumer experience that, we've been, surveying as well. Agents and brokers are increasingly being relied upon to provide some of this information. Having just very recently, in the last couple of weeks, gone through the home buying and selling process myself, even though I know the area fairly well, I come from, the environment where I have all the resources at my hands to find this information. Having an agent who understood some of the little nuances of the local area and things that we would be dealing with, even down to the associations and some of those things, increasingly consumers are going to be demanding that of brokers and agents. And, strategically, it's a direction that CMLS has been going for a long period of time, to aggregate and curate as much of that information, to put it at brokers and agents' fingertips with just really one click of the button instead of the multiple places they're having to go to right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes so much sense. We want them to have every piece of information and more that can be found anywhere else. The worst thing that can happen is a consumer says, oh, well, I found this information and the agent doesn't have it themselves. That is just the kiss of death, right?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And for the agent to have it at their fingertips, God knows that I was texting my agent at 9 o'clock at night wanting to have information, and for them to answer back to me, well, I'm gonna have to wait until tomorrow to get it. That's just, in today's age, consumers are not gonna fly with that. So
no, they have no patience. None of us do. Someone texts you and you want them to text you back basically as soon as you've hit go, right? It's just
exactly
how it works.
exactly.
We're all very anxious and very impatient. Okay, so if you could tell us a little bit about the scope of the partnership you're forming with Local Logic, and how will realtors benefit, and how will their ultimately their clients benefit from it?
Yeah, a lot of it goes into, us curating as much as we possibly can about the property, from the property specifics to the community specifics. Local Logic really fills one of those, holes for us, that even though we have all these different products that may have neighborhood information and, some of the more granular things about the general environment that you're finding around a property, it's not really integrated into all of our systems. And Local Logic is going to give us the ability to bulk load all of that data into our systems, parse it out to the different applications and platforms that can utilize it, and basically give our brokers, really kind of that one-stop shop to be able to look at the neighborhood information, the school information, everything that, is important, to a consumer, that an agent now will not have to dig and search through multiple places for it, since we're going to be the ones curating the information. I think it's an important step. I know that kind of gets into the weeds, and a lot of agents and brokers don't understand that. But our goal, one of our consultants here gave me a saying that agents don't want the easy button, they want no button. And I think the opportunity to give our agents and brokers and their consumers the no button option is something that's very important to us. And data is king, and Local Logic has done a great job of curating it and providing us the opportunity to integrate it into all of our systems. We're very excited about the partnership.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to see it happening. I know there's other MLSs just starting to look at it as well. So Maybe give us some perspective on, conceptually it makes so much sense, right, to empower agents with more information, but maybe give us like your vision of maybe sort of a typical use case of where you will see how you can empower realtors with this local data inside of the core MLS technologies.
Yeah, I mean, just the ability, Perchwell is one of the new products we're rolling out, and the ability to have, pull up a display page within the multiple listing service that integrates data from potentially 5, 10 different, areas is very, very important. We're on this march to be property centric, and local logic gives us, kind of that wrapper of information to put around a property, to allow us to dive a little bit deeper into the property, in and of itself. So, those are the elements that, as we're going forward, I think is going to be, huge for our brokers and our agents, and can't really, speak to the importance of, a trusted partner to provide that information. Not all data providers are created equally. And, as we've gone through this process, it's become, readily clear to us that, especially if you're an MLS exec out here, listening to this, you guys need to do the due diligence on the data that you're providing to your agents, because you got to have some trust in what it is that you're putting out there. Because if they don't trust you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what cool things you're developing for them. If the data is not reliable, that's one of the primary things you got to focus on.
Absolutely. Do you envision times where someone might be able to search, like an agent could provide a search where it would, someone's particularly interested in having a dog park within a half a mile or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, those community elements, are so huge. And, having just moved and having a grandson that, we wanted to be within walking distance of a park with a playground. And, just having some of those search elements that are just not available in MLS systems right now, is going to be, pretty key going forward. We've seen a lot of different elements that have tied into the experience, the drive into work and things along those lines. But, that more community-based, search, and really, extending it out, not just, within the MLS systems, but, there's a lot of interactive play in between the MLS systems and the consumer now, where the consumer can self-direct their searches, and providing them with that ability to granularize, if that's a word, their search experience is going to be huge for them as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So clearly these kinds of things serve not only the realtor themselves, but consumers. How do you envision CRMLS and helping brokers serve the direct line into their clients and potential clients with this?
Obviously, we're always going to stand behind the brokerage community and the tools that we develop to have the brokers and agents deliver to their consumer. But, the consumers are clamoring more and more to have that self-directed, opportunity within the platforms. And, we'll be working with all of our front-end partners to integrate this data and provide search parameters, across the board. The ability for us to actually bulk download all of that data into our system, means that it's going to be a much more seamless process to integrate not just listing data, but property specific data that we're diving into, and the community data into those search parameters. I think that we may run the risk of being, feeding our brokers and agents with a fire hose at this point. But, I think I'd rather be accused of giving too much than not enough.
Absolutely. I took a look recently at all the different types of data that Local Logic provides, and it is very massive. You're right. It's a lot. I think the perception might be, oh, it's about, amenities locally. Certainly it's that, but there's a whole lot more to it than that, which
there is.
So for a consumer that I just did some focus groups with consumers, boy, they're a lot smarter than we ever give them credit for. And the types of information they were asking for is exactly the type of information you're going to have. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and they're demanding of the tools that their agents and their brokers are providing to them. And it's an expensive premise for a brokerage to go out and to procure all this data and to find partners to deliver it all. And it's the age-old problem within a brokerage, even the larger brokerage, cobbling together all these different pieces of technology. And especially if, the MLS can serve as that conduit to provide the brokerage community with, these singular feeds of not just listing data, but, the property and community data at the same time. A next step for IDX, so to speak, with some license, restrictions onto its use. That's really the direction that MLSs need to go. I mean, being as sticky as we possibly can to our brokerage community and doing for them, in an aggregate, what is very difficult for them to do individually is something that's I think going to be key for us moving forward.
I love that. So we expand the concept of MLSs have always created curated, clean listing data, but let's become the all things data curator for brokers and agents, become that center for many things. Certainly local logic is a great one. There might be more that you'll come up with down the road.
Yeah, and we're coming to our brokerage community hat in hand to a certain extent. Cooperation is going to be so key for MLSs going forward. And the more that brokerages cooperate with each other in regards to data, and setting that to a certain extent level playing field on access to all data, regarding a listing and property, I think is really kind of where we're heading. I may make some people uncomfortable with some of the things that I think that should be shared, but it's based off of research that we're seeing that the things that the consumers want to see, and we've got to get there before others do that.
Yeah, the idea that if we keep our book in the back room and they have to come to us to see it, we're kind of past that stage. The better is to say we're the all things information provider. So come to us, because we'll not only give you the information, we'll interpret it for you, right? So the information can be part of what attracts a consumer to a broker in the first place.
Yeah, the genie's been out of the bottle for over 20 years and it's not going back in. So why don't we, find ways to utilize it and make the genie work for our brokerages instead of, just a direct to the consumer play.
Makes sense. So what types of information, I know that you just inked this deal shortly, so you may not know all of it, but what kinds of information are you envisioning that you're going to be sharing with realtors and allowing them to share with their clients?
To the depth of what Local Logic has to offer. I think that, we're just now kind of getting to the process of getting the downloads and seeing what data elements are there. As we've gone through this process with tax records and mortgage records and things along those lines, we're just in the initial, phases of downloading everything that Local Logic has to offer. The thing that always plays into this is there are elements of our data that plays well with elements of Local Logic's data that really kind of, combined, they take it to, another level. Some of the things that you mentioned on the side of community information, there's some major players in the industry that are headed down this road, and MLSs really, really need to, start pedaling pretty hard to get that information out there. And it's not just, school scores, and it's not just, neighborhood information. It's really that vision of marrying all that into listing data and providing some of those tool sets. And then, even allowing, some feedback from the brokerage community and consumers as to what magical things can be done when all of these data elements are combined together. I think that MLSs throw away terabytes of data on a monthly basis,
Yeah.
And it is time that we start mining those things, seeing, to a granular level, in a neighborhood, what is the most desirable aspect from a search standpoint? When you turn this stuff loose to the consumer, what are they looking for most regularly? And how can I provide intelligence on that back to a broker and an agent, especially when they're taking a listing, and, what do they highlight? What do they, take photos of, things along those lines. That's really the elements that, longer term that, have me excited. It's not just the data and the elements that are coming into play, but how it all is going to mix together and interact with the consumer and the intelligence we can provide back to the brokerage community off of all of that. That's the holy grail for me on all of this.
Right. So we're not data providers, we're data intelligence providers. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Much more meaningful. And again, in these groups I just did, consumers were asking for things like, well, how noisy is it in the neighborhood? Or how close are the power lines? I don't want to kill bees, all kinds of things that they think about. That, how far is the next, busy street? Because I've got young children. There's so many things that they're looking for that we can enable them with. It's super exciting.
Yeah, and it's some of those elements, I think you need to have an idea that, and I get this all the time, Marilyn, that you have two sides of the equation, and people who represent sellers never recognize that buyers have, not singular concerns, but multiple concerns as well.
Right.
And this partnership in between a buyer's broker and a seller's broker, really needs to be enhanced to the point, because, we're in an increasingly litigious environment. And, especially as the market is cooled tremendously, we're starting to see more of these filings of things coming up where, if we just are transparent and fully disclose everything, I get the argument, well, that doesn't benefit the seller. Well, it definitely doesn't benefit the buyer if they're walking into a property that, something wasn't disclosed to them. So I think we need to get over this idea of salesmanship to a certain extent. And because the property is an open book in so many different places, and it should be an open book between the seller and the buyer. That's where I get people a little bit freaked out, but it is something that I think benefits the brokerage community from a liability standpoint, and from a productivity standpoint, to make sure that deals go as smoothly as they possibly can.
Well, and that we're truly living to protect in the best interest of the consumer. That's what the code of ethics tells us we need to
Yep.
do. Right? So
Yeah.
full transparency and honesty about what it is. But power lines is a good example. Some people might care, most people wouldn't. So, okay, you might eliminate a couple potential buyers, but they're not going to buy the house anyway. So just save yourself that time and focus on people where it does make sense. So
Yeah.
it's just, we're at the stage now where the best service provides the best intelligence and the best transparency. There's just no question about that.
Yep.
So just one final question for you. You're of course a leader in the industry, always have been. What would you say to other MLSs that are starting to embrace the same concept you're describing and may want to look at, doing something that's along the same lines you're doing?
It goes back to one of the statements I made a little bit earlier. All data points are not created equal. And there are wonderful ways to spin things. There's wonderful ways to, package your data and try to sell it to people. But you really got to, wrap your arms around the potential of how it's going to be released in the wild to the consumer, and that it's, this data is accurate, and that it's going to be beneficial to the process of buying and selling homes. There's so many things that we've seen as we've gone down this road of aggregating data that, inaccuracies, should not be something that we gloss over. So, especially if we're going to be the definitive point of truth, you've got to do your due diligence walking into these deals. And that would be the biggest, piece that I would recommend to people, is that you're going to have to curate and aggregate data from multiple different sources. And as you go through this process, just recognize that, all data points are not created equal. And you need to make sure that you're looking underneath the hood and seeing where they're getting the data, how they're getting it, and how accurate some of this information that you'd be providing out to your brokers and agents are. That being said, we, as I said earlier, you guys are behind the 8 ball. You need to be moving in this direction, and you need to be looking at curating as much data as you possibly can. Unfortunately, there are not very many MLSs that are in a position to actually curate this data on their own and aggregate it. Probably the first step, and you need to be there tomorrow or the day after at the latest, is being able to aggregate and curate this data, because that is going to be the baseline going forward for multiple listing services. Because it would probably be prohibitively expensive to cobble together partners that work through APIs to deliver data. The more moving parts, the more likelihood that things break, and you don't want to provide that experience to your brokers and agents either.
And are you finding good cooperation with the technologies that you already offer to integrate this type of information, to expand the kind of data that can be displayed within the systems?
Yes and no. And that's probably why sometimes I'm not the most popular person in the industry. Brokers and agents put pressure on MLSs to provide things quickly, provide them 99.99999% uptime, and they're demanding that we put them in front of where some of the consumer-facing apps are at. And that's a tough task for MLSs to be at, but it is the task that's been given to us, and ones that we've got to do everything we possibly can to get there. In as much as there's so many different initiatives going on in the industry, I applaud all of them, because in all honesty, we're better together than we are separated. And the more that we can get some of those collaborative efforts to move forward in directions that enhance cooperation amongst brokerages, the better off we're going to be.
Totally agree. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving us an update. We may call you back in a couple months after you've gotten further down the road, and you can give us an update on how it's going. Maybe we can look at some goodies that time too.
Yeah, some shameless plugs. I mean, we're developing products internally to actually deliver the end-to-end experience for people to look up information on a property. From my dream is even having appraisal reports and home inspections tied to a property, and allow brokers and agents to see some of that. It's always some sensitive rub about allowing consumers to into that level, but definitely brokers and agents, when they walk into a listing agreement, should have an idea of what's been disclosed on the property. So those are some cool things that we're working on and would love to show you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll be back to you. I'm going to hold you to that. You have a great
perfect.
day, and we're excited to see what you do when it starts rolling out.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Okay.